Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition, and we turned out a poem 589, The Night Was Wide and Furnished Scant. Now, this is a poem when published in 1891 that was titled At Home. So you may want to write that at the top. Although, of course, Emily herself never titled her poetry and would probably have had some problems with this title, although I think it does help us. Now, we are back to line 4 of poem 366, what might have been experience. Here, we'll have two married lovers beside a cozy fire when it's nasty cold outside. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the previous 588 poems. We just finished with 588, I Cried at Penny, Not at Pain. We are in many ways back to poem 495 and lines 23 through 28. I'll not read them, but I'll let you go back to study them on your own. Let's enjoy what's happening outside versus what's happening inside the little cottage where the fire is burning and the two people who are married and lovers are together. The night was wide and furnished scant with but a single star that often as a cloud it met blew out itself for fear. The wind pursued the little bush and drove away the leaves. November left, then clambered up and fretted in the eaves. No squirrel went abroad, a dog's belated feet like intermittent plush he heard adown the empty street to feel if blinds be fast. And closer to the fire, her little rocking chair to draw and shiver for the poor, the housewife's gentle task. How pleasanter, said she, unto the sofa opposite, the sleet than may know thee. Now, if you were just listening to me read that poem, and I read that final line, the sleet than may know thee, you would just as easily assume that it's K-N-O-W thee, as opposed to N-O thee. And this is one of those moments where you have to actually read Emily's stuff to be able to appreciate what she is actually saying. She is saying, I would be willing to give up everything if I could just be with you, sitting here next to the fire. By the way, notice that the opposite of her interlocutor is not mentioned as other than the sofa. It's a remarkable, it's so subtle. In other words, it's her inside the cottage, pulling down the blinds, sheltering out the cold, the fire is built, and on the sofa rests her lover, her husband, and there's this connection between the two of them. Look how it starts though. It begins with the night. It's wide, and it furnishes, notice all these verbs, they're brilliant. Scant with but a single star. In other words, you can't see anything outside star. That often as a cloud it met, blew out itself for fear. A beautiful, brilliant way to say it's getting cold outside. Even the clouds are running away. The wind pursued the little bush. Now we got blowing of wind. And drove away the leaves. Well, obviously, immediately think of Emily's contemporary Whitman in Leaves of Grass. November left. Then clambered up. Again, the verbs here are brilliant. And fretted in the eaves. Even the month of November, it was too cold for, as obviously we move into December. And then she loves to reference squirrels. She'll mention them 9 times in poems, but now notice, no squirrels are abroad. And then she mentions the dogs, the belated foot. You'll remember, of course, her dog Carlo was mentioned. She'll mention hounds or dogs in 8 of her poems. Belated feet like intermittent plush, he heard. By the way, alternate readings of this are be heard and were heard. Down the empty street. In other words, nobody's outside. Right? Nobody's outside. To feel if blinds be fast and closer to the fire, her, notice for the first time now, a woman is mentioned inside the cottage. Little rocking chair to draw and shiver for the poor. I told you guys about Emily's use of the word little in 172 poems. She loves this word to emphasize the smallness of it. Her little rocking chair to draw and shiver for the poor. It's in a brilliant aside. In other words, if you have a heart, if you have any compassion on a cold and stormy winter night, sitting next to a nice warm fire, you can't help but think about those who don't have that fire, right? And who would those people be? The poor, right? Which takes us in some ways back to our shanties of 850A. Then the housewife's gentle task. How pleasanter, said she. By the way, notice here, the housewife says, I'm more than willing to keep the interior of this cottage against the cold of the outside. How pleasanter, said she, notice without the quotation marks, unto the sofa opposite. What? She's talking to a chair? Well, no, she's talking to the man who's on the sofa. The sleet than may know thee. She says, I would prefer, right, I'd rather be with you in spite of the nasty weather than to have a beautiful day in May, but to be all alone. Of course, the thee of this poem will take us back again to to our study of 587 in her referencing thee. But here, of course, we understand it, that the thee is not the sofa, but rather the one on the sofa. It's brilliant. It's brilliant the way she sets it up. At 2a, I think the point here she's making is that being with the one you love is the best, especially when the weather outside is nasty. It might be physical weather, it might be emotional weather, right? At 2b, I love the verbs of this poem. Did you see it? Furnished, blew, pursued, drove, clamored, fretted. These are brilliant verbs that she's using. At 3a, I read this poem and I immediately find myself thinking about Thomas Hardy's The Darkling Thrush. I'll only read it. We have given full lectures on it at learnstrong.net. You'll remember this brilliant poem that Hardy writes the last day of the 19th century, getting ready for the 20th century. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre gray, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled vine stems scoured the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. The land's sharp features seemed to be the century's corpse outlent, his crypt the cloudy canopy, the wind his death lament. The ancient pulse of germ and birth was shrunken, hard and dry, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead, in a full-hearted evensong of joy, illimited, an ancient thrush, frail, gaunt, and small, in blast-beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar and nigh around, that I could think there trembled through his happy good-night air some blessed hope, whereof he knew, and I was unaware. Of course, the hope as well is present in Emily's poem. And finally, at 3b, who is someone in your life that you would want on that sofa when the cold nastiness outside brings you indoors next to your fire and your little rocking chair? And who is it that you would want to be with on a night like that? And you take that even over a beautiful May day. Thank you.